Millionaire sees a beggar with a baby in the rain and gives her the keys to his house. But when he... Don't forget to subscribe to the Stories of Life's Acts channel. And before we continue this story, let us know where you are from. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe as we release videos every day at 12:30 p.m. Thomas Sullivan is a man who has everything many people dream of: a successful career, a luxurious mansion in downtown New York, and immense wealth that he has built through hard work. As the chief executive officer of one of the city's largest financial corporations, Thomas's life is always filled with meetings, contracts, and important decisions. He is the epitome of a successful man, but also the embodiment of someone who never lets emotions interfere with work. Most people around Thomas think of him as cold, sometimes even too rational. He has no time for romantic relationships or joyful moments with family. His life is like a precise clock. Everything is planned and tightly controlled. He is so used to the fast-paced lifestyle that there is no room for emotions or relaxation. Every morning, Thomas wakes up very early, preparing for a long day at work. He wakes up not to enjoy a new day, but to carry out the tasks already planned. Emotions hold no value in his work. He believes emotions are weakness, and in the financial world, weakness will only lead to failure. Therefore, he has learned to suppress them and maintain a cold and calm demeanor. One rainy morning, Thomas drove to the airport for an important meeting. The rain poured down on the streets of New York, making the city gloomy and somber. Cars lined up on the wet roads, and the heavy raindrops tapped on the windows of Thomas's car, creating a steady rhythm. Despite the rain, life went on, and the hurried people continued their work. Thomas felt the rush and tension of the city, but in his heart, all of that seemed insignificant. He just needed to get to the airport on time, carry out the meeting successfully, and continue his work. His life had no room for outside factors to disturb him. He had grown accustomed to living in a cold world where every decision had to be carefully calculated. However, as he was driving through the familiar streets, an unexpected sight made him stop. He saw a woman standing on the sidewalk under the heavy rain. It was an image he couldn't have imagined, a scene that didn't quite fit with the busy atmosphere of the city. A young woman, wearing an old and soaked raincoat, was holding a child in her arms. In the torrential rain, she tried to protect the child, but it seemed like there was nothing she could do to shield it from the downpour falling from above. Although life around her continued, the woman's expression and the image of the rainstorm made Thomas feel as though he were stuck in a strange moment. He saw resilience in her eyes, exhaustion mixed with determination. She was trying her best to protect her child, but clearly she did not have the strength to fight off the cold rain. She held up a sign with the words, "Need help. We need food and shelter." Although he was used to seeing difficult scenes like this in the city, something about this moment made it impossible for him to ignore. In that moment, a strange feeling arose within Thomas. He couldn't explain the emotion, but it made him stop and think. He had once been poor, having gone through days with nothing, and perhaps that made him unable to dismiss the woman's plight. But then, he quickly pushed those thoughts aside and focused on his work, because in Thomas's world, work was always more important than anything else. However, despite trying to ignore it, the woman's gaze stayed in his mind. Every time he looked through the car window, her image appeared in his head, like a wave invading his thoughts that he could not shake off. The feeling of unease and empathy grew stronger, making it impossible for him to keep driving without doing something. And then, when the traffic light turned green, Thomas could not continue without acting. A sudden decision awaited him, a decision he may have never thought about in his rational life. When the light turned green, instead of driving on as usual, something inexplicable made Thomas's hand loosen on the steering wheel. He didn't press the gas. Instead, he lowered the car window. The rain continued to pour heavily, but Thomas did not pay attention to that. His mind was entirely captivated by the image of the woman with the child in her arms. She stood there, in the cold rain, without any shelter or protection. Thomas could see her trembling hands, her tired eyes, yet she still tried to hold on. Despite her confusion and exhaustion, she kept a resilient look in her eyes, and that determination made it impossible for Thomas to look away. He gazed at the sign she was holding. Need help. We need food and shelter. A simple plea for help, yet filled with desperation. Thomas couldn't help but remember the days of poverty he endured as a child, times when he had to endure the cold New York winter without any place to shelter or anyone to help. However, that was a long time ago, and now Thomas was a successful man with all the wealth in the world. He no longer had to worry about such things. But this time, unlike the previous times he had seen beggars on the streets, a strange feeling rose within him. It was something he could not shake off. It seemed to come from deep within his heart, a part of him he had locked away for a long time, a part he had always tried to forget. Just for a brief moment, but in that moment, it seemed like everything around him quieted down. The cars rushed by, people hurried down the street, but none of that mattered anymore. All that mattered to Thomas was the woman and the child. His hand suddenly tightened on the steering wheel, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he lowered the car window a little more, closing the distance between him and the woman. The rain continued to pour down heavily, but in the stillness of the car, Thomas could feel something strange, a powerful urge, a wave crashing into his heart. He didn't know why he was feeling this way. Why couldn't he just keep driving like he had done before? Why had he stopped? The only answer he could think of was empathy. Empathy for the woman trying to protect her child. Empathy for the hardships she was facing. But empathy was just a word, and actions required resolve. This feeling was something Thomas could not ignore. He couldn't just drive away without doing something. It seemed like something had changed within him. A decision had formed that he could not stop. He looked at the woman again through the rearview mirror, then suddenly spoke. "Come here." His voice at first sounded a bit dry, but it carried an unexpected gentleness. The woman turned around, hesitantly looking at him, her eyes betraying her doubt. She wasn't sure if this was some kind of trap. However, when she looked at the child in her arms, the worry in her eyes finally made her decide to approach. The woman walked slowly toward the car, holding the child tightly in her arms. The raindrops still fell on her shoulders, but she had no choice but to accept the help Thomas was offering. Her eyes, full of caution, looked at Thomas as if trying to gauge whether he was truly a good person. But eventually, she got into the car. Thomas didn't say anything more. He just watched her through the rearview mirror, her eyes reflecting an indescribable weariness. He realized that she was not only lacking material things, but it seemed she had also lost her sense of safety in her heart. The cold outside might soak her body, but the anxiety and fear within her were what made her feel colder than ever. The car began to move, and in the quiet of the luxurious vehicle, the sounds of the city seemed to vanish. Both of them, though silent, shared a connection of some sort, an unspoken understanding. They both knew that, at this moment, they were finding a small sense of safety in the chaos outside. And although Thomas still did not understand why he had done this, he knew that this action, however small, had changed something within him. The rain showed no signs of letting up as Thomas's car drove through the crowded streets of New York. At this moment, the car was filled with silence, the only sounds being the swish of the windshield wipers and the smooth hum of the car's engine. Both Thomas and the stranger woman with the little child remained quiet. Each had their own thoughts, but none of them knew that this moment would change their lives forever. Thomas looked in the rearview mirror. The woman sat silently, holding the child close to her. Although the rain still poured heavily, she showed no signs of wanting to reject the help, but there was a hint of worry in her eyes. She could sense the strangeness, and though Thomas was a stranger to her, in that moment he felt an unusual closeness. He knew he could never go back to the way things were before. After a short while, they left the busy streets and entered quieter areas. Thomas's car drove through narrow streets, gradually leading them to an upscale neighborhood. The woman remained silent, only looking out the window, breathing in the damp air from the rain, but her eyes never stopped looking anxiously at the child in her arms. When the car stopped in front of the large gate of the mansion, Thomas looked in the rearview mirror again. "This is where I live," he said softly. "You can stay here until I come back." The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of surprise and suspicion. She couldn't believe that a stranger would so easily offer her shelter in such a lavish house. All she knew about this world was coldness and distance. She wasn't used to this kind of help, and his kindness made her feel doubtful. However, when she looked into his eyes, she sensed something genuine, an offer with no ill intentions. Thomas opened the car door and stepped out. He turned around, pulled open the back door, and helped the woman and the child out. They stood on the sidewalk in front of the grand gate of the mansion. Under the dim streetlights, the house loomed like a castle in the rain. "Come on," Thomas said. "I will take you inside. You and the child need to rest." The woman hesitated, but eventually decided to enter. As they stepped into the house, Thomas couldn't shake off a strange feeling. The house was always filled with luxury, but something had changed. He no longer felt the joy he once did standing in this cold, empty house. The presence of the woman and child had brought a warmth to this space, a life he had never noticed before. Thomas's house, with its glass walls and modern decor, now felt different. Everything in it had always conveyed coldness and solitude, even though it was beautiful. But as the woman entered, the space seemed to light up with a subtle warmth, as if her presence had brought a slight change to the atmosphere. Thomas didn't know what he was doing. He had brought her here without thinking, simply driven by empathy and an inner urge. But now, as they stood in the quiet house, he suddenly realized he did not want to return to his old life, the cold, lonely life, where everything revolved around work and success. Something new was beginning to grow in his mind, a feeling he had never experienced before. "Sit down," Thomas said, pointing to a soft sofa in the living room. "You can rest here. I will bring you some hot food." The woman nodded, sitting down and gently placing the child beside her. Thomas didn't say anything more, but went into the kitchen, where he grabbed some quick meals to bring to her. Although he didn't know the woman well, he felt the need to do something for her and the child. He wondered if he could help her overcome these struggles, if he could do something to change their lives. Meanwhile, the woman looked around the room, feeling that everything was unfamiliar yet safe. She had never imagined that she would be brought to a place like this. Everything here was so luxurious, but it did not feel cold at all, as if the house was welcoming her. She felt like she was part of a world she had never known before. She couldn't understand why Thomas was helping her, but in that moment, she couldn't help but feel the warmth and kindness in his actions. Though she still had many worries and doubts, it seemed as though a new door had opened in her life, a door that could lead to a better future for her and the child. The room became quiet after Thomas brought the food to the woman. The cold air from outside still crept in through the large glass doors, but in this luxurious house, a sense of warmth enveloped the space. The woman sat on the sofa, the baby sound asleep in her arms, the small child's skin seeming to warm up after being sheltered in this cozy environment. Thomas stood by the kitchen door, looking at the woman and the child. Although he said nothing, his gaze held many thoughts. He still couldn't understand why he had made the decision to act the way he did. Bringing a stranger and her child into his home was something he was sure he would never have done before. But now, seeing the woman sitting there, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also with worry, Thomas knew that he had done the right thing. He approached and handed her a plate with hot food. "Eat a little. You need to keep your strength up to take care of the baby." The woman took the plate, her eyes slightly hesitant, but also full of appreciation. Though he was a stranger, Thomas's gaze made her feel safe. For the first time in a long while, she felt a true warmth, not just from the cold outside, but also from the people around her. "Thank you so much," the woman said softly, her voice carrying a weariness. "But I do not know how long I can stay here. I do not want to bother you." Thomas sat down in the chair opposite her, looking directly into her eyes. "You're not bothering me. I am not helping you just out of charity. I understand what it is like to have nowhere to go, to have no one to help." The woman fell silent, but deep inside, those words seemed to touch a deep corner of her heart. She never expected that someone as successful and cold as Thomas could understand her feelings. He was even willing to help her without hesitation. "My name is Emma," she said after a moment of silence. "Thank you for helping me and Lucy. I really do not know what I would have done if I had not met you." Thomas gently nodded. "You don't need to thank me. It is just something I felt was the right thing to do." A brief silence filled the space. The woman ate slowly, trying not to disturb the sleeping baby. Thomas observed her for a moment longer. He realized that while everything around him continued to run on its usual rhythm, Emma and her child had been pushed into a corner of life that even someone as wealthy as he could not imagine. He wondered if he could help her change her fate, help her find a spark of hope in her life again. "Emma, you will stay here until everything is settled," Thomas said, breaking the silence. "I will help you find a job and a place to live. You do not have to worry anymore." Emma looked up, her eyes suddenly lighting up. Thomas's words felt like a ray of light shining into the darkness she had been living in. A new hope began to blossom in her heart, even though she did not know where it would lead. She was used to handling everything on her own, but now Thomas's help made her feel like she didn't have to fight alone anymore. I do not know what to say," Emma exclaimed, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you so much." Thomas simply smiled, feeling a sense of comfort seeing the change in her eyes. He knew he couldn't change her past, but at least he could help her have a better future. He wasn't sure if he could do everything he promised, but at least he would try. "We will do everything together," Thomas said, his voice full of determination. "You and the baby won't have to suffer anymore." Emma looked into Thomas's eyes, and in that moment, she felt a peace she had never known. A feeling that, even though life might still be difficult, at least she was not alone anymore. She felt as though she had found a safe place, a place where she could start over. In that moment, Thomas realized that his actions had not only changed Emma's life, but might also change his own forever. He began to see that, in a life filled with goals and ambitions, sometimes the smallest, simplest actions brought about the most significant changes. In the following days, Emma and her baby Lucy gradually got used to their new life in Thomas's mansion. Emma still couldn't believe that she had gone from being a homeless wanderer with nowhere to turn to living in a luxurious house with all her needs taken care of. However, her life wasn't without its challenges. Every morning, Thomas left for work early and came back late. Meanwhile, Emma stayed home to care for Lucy and did various chores around the house. Although it wasn't difficult work, for someone like Emma, this was a completely new experience. She had never lived in an environment where everything was provided and there was no need to worry about basic necessities. One day, when Thomas came home, he was surprised to find Emma sitting on the sofa, looking a little tense. She didn't seem like her usual self, cheerful and relaxed. Thomas immediately noticed the change. "Is something wrong?" Thomas asked, looking at her closely. Emma stared at him for a while, as if trying to find the right words. Finally, she sighed and said, "I feel like I am bothering you. I'm not used to this life. I am not used to being helped like this. I want to be independent, to do something, instead of just sitting here and accepting help." Thomas remained silent for a moment, thinking about what Emma had just said. He understood her feelings. Emma was a strong and resilient person, someone who was used to overcoming difficulties on her own. His help was something new for her, a feeling she was not used to accepting easily. "Emma," Thomas said, his voice gentle yet firm, "I do not think you are bothering me. On the contrary, I am happy that I can help you and Lucy. But I understand if you feel uncomfortable. I will help you find a job if that is what you want. But do not feel like you owe me anything. You do not need to feel responsible." Emma looked at him, sensing the sincerity in Thomas's words. At that moment, she could not hide her feelings any longer. She felt as though something had shifted inside her. She no longer felt like a burden to anyone and realized she could start a new life. "Thank you so much," Emma said, her voice softer. I do not know where I would be without you. But I will try. I will find a job and do something useful." Thomas nodded, pleased with her decision. He knew that in life, sometimes helping others was not just about giving, but also about helping someone find their own strength. He couldn't live forever in this luxurious house, and he couldn't do everything for Emma. But he could help her rediscover her self-confidence, her ability to stand on her own. In the following weeks, Thomas helped Emma search for a job. He contacted some of his friends and introduced her to small companies where she could start over. At first, Emma felt anxious and lacked confidence, but gradually she realized that she was capable of doing it. Thomas didn't just help her find a job, he also helped her develop a plan to learn new skills, something she had neglected for a long time. Eventually, Emma found a part-time job at a cafe near the house. This job not only provided her with an income, but also gave her a sense of independence and freedom. More importantly, Emma no longer felt like a burden to anyone. She could take care of herself and her child. One day, after returning home from work, Emma found Thomas sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper. He smiled when he saw her walk in, holding a small bag. "You did great," Thomas said, his voice full of pride. "I knew you could do it." Emma felt a strange joy. She hadn't realized how much she had changed over the time. She was no longer a worried, helpless woman, but a strong mother, able to stand firm and care for her child. She didn't know that this change came not only from the job or the help Thomas gave her, but from within herself. Her life had started to have more meaning, and she realized that no matter how difficult life was, she could always rise up and keep moving forward. "Thank you, Thomas," she thought to herself, not only for helping her, but for helping her rediscover herself. Things started to stabilize for Emma. The part-time job at the cafe gave her a steady income and made her feel more confident. She began to make new friends, and the friendly colleagues who had helped her when she first started became a source of support. Lucy also gradually adapted to the new life, being well cared for and playing in the large garden of Thomas's house. However, Emma still could not stop worrying about the future. She knew that there was still so much to learn, and many challenges awaited her. The job, though stable, wasn't a long-term one, and sometimes she still felt that she wasn't strong enough to overcome everything. One afternoon, while Emma was resting in the garden, Thomas stepped outside holding a piece of paper. He looked worried, which made Emma feel like something was wrong. "Can you help me with something?" Thomas asked, his voice gentle but still filled with tension. Emma looked up at him, her gaze focused. "What is it, Thomas?" Thomas held out the paper and handed it to her. "This is a job opportunity. A big company is hiring for an HR manager. I think you should consider applying." Emma looked at the paper, then back at Thomas. "Do you really want me to work for such a big company?" "I'm not sure if I am capable of it." Thomas smiled, but his face remained serious. "You've changed a lot, Emma. You are not just the woman who needed help anymore. You are a strong person. I believe you can do it." Emma felt a stir in her heart. This was an opportunity she could not pass up, but it was also a big challenge. She thought back to the difficult days before, when everything seemed impossible to overcome. But now, perhaps she was ready to face a new challenge. "I will try," Emma decided, her voice firm. "Thank you for believing in me." Thomas looked at her with a proud expression. "I have always believed in you, Emma." In the days that followed, Emma spent time learning more about the company she was applying to, researching the job and its requirements. She felt anxious and unsettled, but she also understood that this was an opportunity to change her life once again. The night before the interview, she couldn't sleep. Thoughts about the questions she would have to answer during the interview kept her up, making her feel tense. The next morning, Thomas drove her to the company for the interview. On the way, he comforted her. "Emma, you have prepared very well. Just be confident and show them what you have got, just like you always have. They will see your potential." Emma thanked him and felt a bit lighter. Although she didn't know what the result would be, she could feel the trust and affection Thomas had for her. As she stepped into the company building, Emma felt like she had entered a completely different world. Everything around her was luxurious, modern, and full of challenges. But she would not allow herself to feel weak. She took a deep breath and walked into the interview room. After about an hour of the interview, Emma left the room with mixed feelings. She wasn't sure if she could do it, but at least she had given her best effort. Returning home, she found Thomas in the living room. "You did great," Thomas said, looking into her eyes with encouragement. "No matter the outcome, I am always proud of you." Emma sat down, tired but feeling at peace. "Thank you, Thomas. I know I could not have done it without your support." The following days passed in tense anticipation. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the interview, wondering if she was good enough. A week later, she received a phone call from the company. She trembled as she heard the voice on the other end. "Hello, Emma. This is the Human Resources Director from XYZ Company. We were very impressed with your interview, and we are excited to inform you that you have been offered the position of Human Resources Manager." Emma couldn't believe her ears. Suddenly, all her worries and tension melted away. She had done it. She had truly changed her life. When she shared the good news with Thomas, he smiled, his eyes sparkling with pride. "I told you, you could do it." Emma felt moved, as if she were standing at the peak of a new journey. Her life had changed, and she knew this was just the first step in a long path ahead. "We will keep moving forward together," she said, her eyes full of determination and faith in the future. With her new job, Emma felt like she had truly entered a new chapter of her life. Each day, she woke up with a fresh outlook, full of motivation and resolve. Her role as Human Resources Manager at XYZ Company allowed her to grow, learn new skills, and meet like-minded individuals. She felt herself maturing, not only professionally, but also in how she viewed life. Thomas was always by her side, supporting and encouraging her. He wasn't just the one who had helped her find a new job, he was also her companion, always believing in her and cheering her on through every challenge. Even when work kept him busy, he always made time to care, share, and help her navigate through the difficulties in her life. Emma was no longer the weak girl, fearful of the future. She had created her own life, nurtured her dreams, and continued to rise. The days when she wandered the streets seemed like a distant past, one she could now look back on with a smile. One day, after a stressful day at work, Emma returned home and found Thomas standing in the garden, gazing up at the sky. She walked over to him, feeling the peaceful atmosphere of the late afternoon. Thomas turned around and looked at her with a gentle smile. "How do you feel?" he asked. Emma sat down next to him, feeling the warmth of his presence. "I feel like I have changed a lot. Life now is nothing like it used to be. I no longer have to worry about making ends meet, and I am not afraid of the future." Thomas smiled, his eyes soft yet filled with pride. "You have done very well. You have proven that you can do it, not only for yourself, but also for Lucy." Emma looked down and saw Lucy playing in the garden, happily running around under the sunlight. She felt happiness knowing her daughter was growing up in an environment full of love and care. "I just want Lucy to have a better future, not like the one I went through," Emma said, her voice lowering but full of determination. Thomas nodded, his eyes bright with understanding. "You will make it, Emma, and I will always be here with you, helping you overcome every challenge." Emma felt the firmness in his words. She knew that, no matter how life changed, she would always have a companion by her side. What she had gone through and what she had now were things that could not be changed, but she could still change her future. She held Thomas's hand tightly, smiling. "Thank you for everything. Because of you, I was able to rise up and find myself again." "You do not have to thank me," Thomas replied, his gaze warm. "You deserve all the good things. You and Lucy both deserve to have a happy life." The girl looked toward the horizon, her heart filled with hope. Life could be difficult, but she knew that as long as she did not give up, as long as she kept moving forward, everything could change. Emma and Lucy had a new beginning, and she believed this was just the first step of a long journey filled with opportunities ahead. As the sunset descended, a new day began with new dreams and hopes. Emma knew that with love, perseverance, and determination, she would never have to go back to the past. She would always stand firmly on her new path, confidently building a bright future for herself and her daughter. And Emma's story would stand as proof of the strength and potential for change in every person, no matter the circumstances. Thank you all for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on the best stories. See you in the next one.